Welcome back, everybody, to the Land Between the Meadows. I'm your host, Mr. Cable, and I hope this podcast comes to you in good tidings. I hope everybody's well. I hope your family's well. I hope your social distancing is going well, and you're keeping yourself occupied with many things, and hopefully, maybe some historical things. If you want to connect to me, you can find me at KY History Pod on Twitter, or you can search that same handle on Facebook at KY History Pod, and it'll take you right to our Facebook page, or you can just search The Land Between the Meadows, and that'll take you to our Facebook page as well. Anything you can do that can keep you occupied or enjoy the current times, I encourage you to do that. I also want to mention some new content that we're able to put out. We have now made or started up a YouTube channel, and these videos, I posted one here the other day that you can check out. It's just going to be a brief 5-minute video, or at least I'm going to try to keep it under 5 minutes, of just some historical figure or historical event, something that we probably haven't or may not cover as detailed in a podcast. Something that's quick, or I might just take a podcast we've done and kind of shorten it up so you can get the gist of it in about 4 or 5 minutes. Nothing big, nothing too complicated. And also I want to give a huge shout out to Russ Carson Jr. on Family Tree Nuts. It is also a YouTube channel he's created, and he also has a Facebook page. But if you like history, or if you enjoy listening to me and Mr. Pope, and you enjoy Kentucky, or just history in general, check out his YouTube channel and his Facebook page, because he's putting out videos almost daily that are just so well done and so historically accurate and fascinating. There's a lot of genealogy that he puts into it as well, and it's whole genealogy service if you want to. Hopefully here in the future we'll be able to get him on to the podcast and he can kind of talk more about it. Very nice guy. I really encourage you to check it out. But again, if you find us on Facebook, Twitter, whatever kind of social media it is, share our links, like, share, subscribe, all those things, and write a good review on our podcast as well if you have time. We really appreciate it. I always love getting a message from a subscriber or a listener, and it always just makes me more energetic to do more and put more content out there. It really drives us to get more and better at this podcast and now our YouTube channel, and maybe hopefully I can get the website going as well. I've been looking into it. I think I'm ready to really try to get it going or get it started, so you can go to one place and have all the Kentucky history you need right there in one spot. But anyway, that's enough talking about all that. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about. In our last episode, we talked about the history of Lincoln County. And today we're going to continue that, but we're going to kind of direct it in a different direction, if that makes sense. In Kentucky, unlike other states, we always refer to our county as our home. I contribute that to the fact that our actual towns are kind of small, so it's not as big. So instead of saying a town like Crab Orchard or Broadhead that's really a really small town, I refer to counties. Rockcastle County, I'm from Rockcastle County, or I'm from Lincoln County. In that manner, you kind of have a broader area that people can find on a map. If you say I'm from Hubble or Ottawa or these little towns, these even smaller communities, people aren't going to know what you're talking about. There's been many times I've told people where I'm from, and they say, "Where's that at?" And then I tell them the next biggest place, and they say, "Where's that at?" And then I finally end up having to say, about 40 miles from south of Lexington. And then they get it. So with that thought in mind, my decision, or what I planned on doing, was we will have a county overview sort of episode that I'll talk about a specific county, and then I will break off into that county. So like for this episode, we're going to do Stanford. And with Stanford, there's a lot of information and things that happen in Stanford. And even this episode, I'm probably not going to get through it all. I'll probably have to do 2 episodes on Stanford alone. And then I'll break off to Crab Orchard and other communities in the county. And again, this is probably just more just historical things and evidence. When it comes to history, and when it comes to putting together a podcast about history, you got to look at 2 things. First, what information you have. And then the rest is speculation. Because the information that I have, yes, I have a lot of information here at my home about Lincoln County and Rockcastle County and some of those things. So right now I don't have a lot of information that I can get. I'm pretty much contained to the information that I got here until the libraries open back up. But when it comes to sources, you have to look at how accurate the sources are. I've been looking into a lot of articles, past articles that have been put out in the Interior Journal and other newspapers around the state, which I've been posting some of those clips on Facebook and Twitter, and you can find those there. But it's all about the sources. When you're looking at an area to say is in Lincoln County, when you start getting really close or to a specific point, there's not as much information. I mean, if everybody packed around a journal and kept a journal, we could really delve out a lot of information. When it gets down to a community, a small community, say like Broughton Town, we got to take information from either the people who live there or some sort of documentation about that. And then the rest becomes speculation if there's not like a written word of, hey, this is what happened in my life. It becomes a bit more harder to get into. So I'll kind of apologize, I guess, for that aspect. That the information sometimes it can get a little muddy or murky because it's always hard to tell sometimes with history. We never know 100% what happened unless we're there. And even then, when I go and tell a story, it might be different from somebody else. Lincoln County, though, is a very strong exception to historical things and historical findings or historical documents, because Lincoln County's courthouse has never burnt down. A lot of courthouses in the 1800s burnt down, and if they burnt down, that lost all the records. All the records are gone, and that's a big deal. When you go over to places in Europe, it's I assume I'll just call them courthouses, but they might not be called courthouses. I don't really know, but they had all those wars. They burnt a lot of their stuff got burnt down. So there's certain periods that it's like completely burnt away, and it's kind of a guessing game. However, Lincoln County is an exception. Their courthouses never burnt down. And we'll talk about that here in a minute about the courthouses. There is a bit more documentation you can find on Lincoln County. But again, when you get into these good stories that me and Mr. Pope have talked about, it's a little harder to find sometimes when you're getting so narrowed down to just a specific area. Now, there are some stories, and I'll throw them in there when I can, but just kind of giving you a basis of how I guess looking at history kind of works sometimes, or at least from my view, how things kind of go. And at this moment, I'm very limited on my resources. So anyway, that's enough about that. Let's get into this discussion about Stanford, a town of first. It's a town of first mainly because it was literally the first in many aspects of development, I should say. I guess that's a good term. In our last discussion, we talked about Lincoln County and how it was settled and some of the places and people of its historical roots, events that it had to offer. But we started with Benjamin Logan and a group of settlers who came to settle on land next to Buffalo Springs, which they named the settlement St. Asaph. Logan built his cabin and then brought his family from Virginia and built his fort. We also talked about how they moved the county seat from Fort Harrod to what is now called Stanford. And that's where we begin today. We're looking at the history of Stanford, one of Kentucky's first towns. We want to start with the name. We've talked about St. Asaph and how John Floyd was a Welshman and the St. Asaph and all that. We've talked about how they settled on St. Asaph Day. But there's an article from the Interior Journal in 1879 that references the naming and even references a first-hand account of a relative who talked to Benjamin Logan. And it's a very interesting read. And if I ever get the website going, I'll put the whole article on the website. So you can go to the website and just check it out and be able to read the whole article. It's a very interesting read because the relative would have had to have been pretty young when he talked to Benjamin Logan. 1879, the math would just add up that way. But I also found in the article, it was talking about an English battle, a battle in England that happened in, I presume, Stanford, England. It had to do with the rebellion, and I assume is Lincoln County in England. It was hard to kind of put this together. And a big army came, and a lot of people died, and I couldn't really figure out what they were getting at. I think they were trying to connect Benjamin Lincoln to this royalty, and whenever whenever Lord Cornwallis surrendered his sword in the Revolutionary War, I think it was trying to connect that to this battle in Stanford in 1140. It was a bit hard to connect. I guess they were trying to say that's how the town got its name, but to me, when we're looking at Stanford, I'm going to go with Standing Fort. The Native Americans referred to it as that, and it just makes the most logical sense that that's what they referred to it as, and that's what they decided to change the name to. But we covered a lot of the beginning years at St. Asaph, and let's look at 1781 when Benjamin Logan offers land to build a courthouse in Stanford. He offers 10 acres for a courthouse and other public buildings, plus 50 acres as long as the court stays in Lincoln County. And it was prepared that a courthouse and a jail was to be built. And then it was actually thrown in there that a bar also needed to be built in the courthouse, which I guess that's not have been a necessity. You have to have a bar in the old courthouse. Because whenever you get a bad sentence, maybe you need to loosen up a little bit. Finally, in May of 1786, the matter was approved for the buildings to be moved to the dwelling of Benjamin Logan. So that was to the fort. But by August, for some reason unknown, the contract was then voided. It's very murky to why this happened. He had offered up his land and said, we got to bring it over here. And he had put the courthouse and the jail inside the fort. Well, I say he put it there. He didn't put it there. He just used part of the fort for it. And then all of a sudden the contract was kind of void. So I assume maybe he wasn't moving it out. I don't really know. There's no documentation to this. However, the following February in 1787, a contract was formed again by 4 magistrates to build a courthouse with white ash or oak logs. Presiding over the court was Isaac Shelby, interesting enough, first governor of Kentucky. This courthouse was used up until 1832, when the Lincoln County Fiscal Court then ordered a new courthouse built. Thomas Helm, John Camden, Michael Davidson, John McRoberts, and William Shanks were put in charge of planning and overseeing the project. This courthouse was made out of bricks. And there's actually some pictures of this courthouse from 1909, because it was still standing then. And honestly, I don't know for sure when it was actually tore down, because the current and fourth courthouse was built in 1909 and is still currently in use. Depending on what kind of podcast platform you're on, if it shows you the Lincoln County Courthouse, that's the one that's in use. It's been in use for over 100 years, which is very, very interesting and a magnificent feat. If you think about it, it's over 100 years old. It was built by F. Kruger and Sons of Mount Vernon. You might be thinking too, well, that's 4 courthouses. I don't understand. I don't remember 4 courthouses. So we'll go backwards. Courthouse that was built in 1909 that is currently standing. That was the 4th one. The 3rd one would have been built in 1832. The 2nd one would have been built in 1887. The 4th one would have then been the one that was in Fort Logan, which was probably not a courthouse as we imagine them today. It was probably just a small room, or it was just the fort. They had it out in the fort. And as I said before, Lincoln County is very unique because none of its courthouses have ever burned. So all those documents were just constantly saved and built up. So let's look at some other aspects of Stanford, because a courthouse, let's be honest, courthouses are boring, are definitely not interesting, because you go to courthouses to do tedious tasks that you probably don't really ever enjoy. So let's look at other aspects of Stanford here. The frontier life, many Indian raids constantly continued through the first settlements of the fort. And we've talked about that, and we'll probably talk about it loads more. But John Logan, who was Benjamin Logan's brother, he also built a house in 1779. It was built of brick and was a Gregorian-style house, if that means anything to you. There is a historical marker for it, and I will try someday to get a picture and post it somewhere. As in the early days of pioneer life, many grist mills also popped up in Lincoln County. There was Myers Mill. Myers Mill was built around 1783 and 1784. Benjamin Logan also had a grist mill that was off Hanging Fork Creek. And if you're not aware, a grist mill is just a mill that grinds cereal grain into flour and those sort of things that used way back when. There's also Bright's Mill that was built northwest of Stanford. So you have a lot, and there's many others I could sit here and list about grist mills that popped up around this time, which is a source of food, as a way to provide. So obviously those are going to pop up in any kind of newly settled area. Another interesting thing that began was a part of the first of Stanford, that Mr. and Miss Samuel Briggs donated some land and a house that was built for a Presbyterian church, and the citizens of Stanford used it for about 4 years. Now, Miss Briggs was Benjamin Logan's sister, and David Rice, the father of Presbyterians in Kentucky, actually preached at this building. The community, of course, grew over the first few decades, and with Benjamin Logan being a very devout Presbyterian, he donated land at Buffalo Springs for a second church in 1782. And then this building was used for about 40 years. And this is known as the earliest church in Kentucky. Now, a post office was also established in 1798 and was located on the corner of Main and Houstonville. And it's actually where the Spurling Funeral Home is now. That's where the original post office was established. if you can envision this kind of land here in Lincoln County, and especially if you can envision Stanford, you kind of have this fort, and then these other places are slowly popping up around it. A courthouse is popping up, a jail is popping up, these grist mills pop up here, there, all over the place. And more settlers come, a church is formed. It's a pattern that we'll see time and time again when we look at each little individual towns and counties. But it's the way settlements have happened. Now, also in 1798, another important factor to any community, education started. In 1798, the property on the south side of town was purchased for a school building around Somerset Street. And this, the Stanford Academy, was the principal seat or place of education for 70 years for boys and girls. The school had very efficient teachers for the time, and many of its alumni are scattered around, which you can only imagine that a place that is newly formed, that is one of the first counties, not the first, but one of the first towns settled, and you have the first school being settled or started, which it's kind of surprising me that it took them this long to get a school going, but they had a lot more other things to probably focus on, like establishing the necessities of a town. And then, of course, as the kids and the children of the area go to this school, they are then going to branch out and influence the rest of the state. It was also known as the School on the Hill. And however, in 1869, the community determined that the boys and the girls needed to be split up. So then the Stanford Female College was then created. Now, as we move into the 1800s, you have places like the Bright's Inn or the Bright's Old Stagecoach Inn, which was built in 1816 by John Bright, son of Revolutionary War soldier Henry Bright. The old inn was built of logs, as is quite typical of the time period. Now, they did add a few rooms on that were stone. An interesting thing about stagecoaches or stagecoach inns is about a mile out, the stagecoach would blow their horn, and then, of course, everybody begins to wonder or watch to see who's coming, because this was kind of an important event. Somebody was coming to the town, so let's see who is showing up. The building was fairly large for 10 rooms on two sides, so it's a total of 20 rooms. Now, a very interesting story here about old John Bright. When he was a boy, he and some other boys were playing around and playing with some sticks, throwing them, and those sorts of things, and he actually said, he picked up a stick and said, "The girl who this chip hits, I'm going to marry." And he struck Elizabeth Morrison, who later became his wife. That is a pretty interesting little story, a little tidbit there. A little romantic part of history there. And what a romantic story. I first fell in love with your mother when I hit her with a stick. Interesting enough, a meal at this inn was 25 cents. Now, I'll say this to another interesting fact about John Bright here, and also referred to as Captain Bright. He also fought in the Mexican War and was visited often by Isaac Shelby, Henry Clay, and George Rogers Clark. So he was a pretty well known little dude here in Stanford, Kentucky. The old inn, I think, was remodeled in 1916, 100 years after it was built. That's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting building. So when we look at some other places that were kind of important to Lincoln County, you have Bauman's Mill. Now, Bauman's Mill was a hotel boarding house that was across from St. Asaph Hotel, but it was later moved a block from where it was originally placed, and it kind of dominated the town from its position. It had a whistle that always went off at noon, but it is still standing today. The mill contains logs from Kentucky's first steam mill, and has always stood kind of dominating. The whistle was actually a signal that could be heard miles around Stanford, letting workers or farmers know that it's time to eat, lunchtime, those sorts of things, which is very important. Now, the Stanford Christian Church was also formed in 1834 around this time, and that building is still standing today. And it was first called the Reformed Church, and actually, surprisingly so, like many churches, they met in homes before they actually built a building. And in 1840, they began to meet in a schoolhouse where the Stanford Baptist Church now stands. In 1846, a new church was built on Depot Street. But in 1881, work was completed on a new church building across the street from the east side of the courthouse. And this building still serves the congregation today. Now, that to me is a very interesting fact, to think that over 100 years this building has been serving the same congregation. That is quite amazing. But I also think the church I grew up at, it's about 100, it's more than 100 years old now. Now this one has kind of went a little bit longer than I expected. I thought I would be able to get to a little past the 1850s and into some more things. And of course, I'm probably skimming over a whole bunch of stuff. There's so much more information, and I think I will go back once things start opening back up and I'm able to go to the library, because the library has a lot of information about Lincoln County, and kind of look at some more documents and find more things that I might be missing or skimming over that took place in Lincoln County. But with all that being said, I'll wrap it up right now. And as I said before, Stanford is probably going to be 2 podcast episodes. Out of all Lincoln County, it has the most history. It's the oldest settlement. It's just the way it's going to be. So I'll probably, if I have a plan, which we all know how plans go, we'll have 2 on Stanford, and then we'll hit up Crab Orchard. I know for sure we'll definitely have at least 1 on Crab Orchard, maybe even 2 on Crab Orchard. And there's a lot of history there as well. But then we'll start hitting the other places, Houstonville, Waynesburg, and some of the smaller communities. There's just so much to even cover in just one county of Lincoln County. So maybe at one point, hopefully sometime, I'll be able to hop over to another county and start it as well. So I want to remind everybody again, just so you know, keep expecting the content to keep coming out. I'll try to get out more videos too. Let me know if you like those, if you think they're good, if I need to do more information, less pictures, whatever you may think. It's completely fine with me. I'll remind you again, if you really like Kentucky history and just history in general, check out Family Tree Nuts. Russ Carson Jr. is doing a great job with his videos and productions. And I'm sure if you like listening to me and Mr. Pope, you're definitely going to like listening to the history and the videos that he's able to do that are on and at historical sites. It's just so well done. Please check it out. And finally, connect to us on Twitter, Facebook at KY History Pod. You can also now go check out our YouTube channel, which is titled Kentucky History Podcast. So with all that being said, stay safe out there, keep your social distance, and find some history. Thanks for listening.